Ranked choice voting is a well-established voting system, and this is a key point that I really want to drive home. It's not an intellectual curiosity or an experimental new system. It's not even new. Ranked choice voting has been around in the world for over a century. It's a widely used, well understood system with nearly 2 decades of experience in the US alone. Alaska just implemented ranked choice voting and open primaries for state and federal elections. Maine has been using RCV statewide since 2018. New York City is the largest city to use ranked choice voting, but many other cities have implemented it. In Utah, over 20 municipalities used it for local elections in 2021. The Virginia and Utah GOPs used ranked choice voting in their last primary elections. Many states have used ranked choice voting for absentee ballots for decades. It's too late for Iowa to be the first, but we would love to see Iowa take the lead on this issue. RCV has a proven track record. It was adopted before 2010 in San Francisco, Minneapolis, and about a dozen other U.S. cities. And by 2021, a record number of cities used ranked choice voting, 32 cities in 7 states. 20 cities were added in Utah alone, as I mentioned, and RCV polled at over 80% approval. And in 2021, 3 additional cities voted to adopt ranked choice voting by popular referenda. The great news is that there's already a tremendous amount of expertise and best practices developed for implementing and running RCV elections. Cedar Rapids won't have to go it alone. The Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center is a nonprofit that provides information, research, and tools to teach the public and policymakers about ranked choice voting. Their team has decades of election administration experience and experience overseeing ranked choice voting elections at all levels of government. I highly recommend checking out their website just to get a sense of how mature the process of ranked choice voting election administration has gotten here in America. The other great news is that ranked choice voting is already compatible in Linn County. Linn County uses ES&S digital scanners, and this equipment's not only compatible with ranked choice voting elections, but it's already being used for ranked choice voting elections by Minneapolis-Hennepin County, which effectively handles much larger instant runoff and single transferable voting elections. The Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center scored Iowa with a 95% readiness score, and I highly recommend reading their report, which is linked at the bottom of this slide. Ranked choice voting is economical. It costs roughly $80,000 per runoff in Cedar Rapids, and that's not including the extra campaign fundraising that occurs during the runoff election month. This is to be compared with an extra cost per RCV election of roughly $3,000 to $4,000. Let's walk through the cost breakdown. Cedar Rapids already has compatible scanners, so there's no need to purchase new machines. The RCV tabulation software is free, courtesy of the RCV Resource Center. As a condition of using that free software, the RCV Resource Center will supply a consultant for $3,000 to $4,000 to make sure the election runs smoothly. This is an invaluable asset because it assures that the implementation, testing, and operations are overseen by someone with extensive experience. It's important to point out that there are also additional costs for implementing the elections initially. For ranked choice voting to be a success, the public needs to be informed, and the election staff and volunteers need to be trained. The Linn County Auditor's Office estimates costs of around $25,000 for voter education and another $18,000 to train staff and volunteers. If you combine the one-time costs with the recurring costs, a single RCV election would still cost less than a single runoff. So, in both the immediate and especially in the long run, this is a very cost-effective proposition. Another excellent feature of ranked choice voting is that it has support across the political spectrum. RCV has been used in conventions for the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, and everything in between. Ranked choice voting is secure and fully auditable. Ranked choice voting elections using existing Iowa infrastructure would still produce physical ballots that leave a paper record. Ranked ballots can be hand recounted when necessary, And there are well-established procedures for recounts and audits in close races. Ranked choice voting consistently polls high with voters, both in terms of satisfaction and ease of use. Very few voters express dissatisfaction with this system. In a time when 51% can be considered a landslide, these numbers are quite remarkable. 77% of New Yorkers who used RCV for primaries support it for future elections. 61% of Maine voters favor keeping or expanding RCV. 94% of Santa Fe voters reported being either very satisfied or somewhat satisfied with RCV. 66% of Minneapolis voters support continued use of RCV, with only 16% against and 18% unsure. 86% of Utah voters were either satisfied or very satisfied with RCV. One possible sign that RCV is well liked by voters can be seen in increased voter turnout in municipal elections. One particular conclusion that seems very well established is that voter turnout increases in municipalities that combine a two-stage election with low turnout runoffs into a single RCV election. This is particularly relevant given Cedar Rapids' drop in runoff participation. Side-by-side comparisons with single plurality voting in RCV in the academic literature are less conclusive, but there's a growing body of evidence that ranked choice voting boosts turnout and very little evidence to suggest that it hurts turnout. Minneapolis provides a striking example. The yellow plot shows turnout in municipal elections. When ranked choice voting was adopted in 2009, municipal election turnout had been continuously declining for over a decade to its lowest point of 19%. After ranked choice voting was adopted, voter turnout continuously increased to an all-time high of 54% in 2021. A recent working paper by McGinn concluded that the introduction of RCV to Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area caused a 9.6 percentage point increase in turnout for mayoral elections on average, and that increased turnout effect is larger for precincts that have higher poverty rates. And it's not just Minneapolis. The trend lines from mayoral elections certainly look like RCV increases turnout. This is a trend that we're starting to see in many cities throughout the country. When voters are engaged, when there's lots of exciting candidates, and when voters feel their voices are being heard, they show up. One very new and exciting result comes from the New York City mayoral primaries, which represented the largest scale municipal RCV election in the US to date. This election saw a very robust increase in voter turnout, both in total and in racial and ethnic representation. Several new papers are in preparation. A few months ago, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund submitted testimony supporting RCV. That testimony contained an analysis of the scholarship on turnout and the impact of ranked choice voting on voters of color, and the NAACP Legal Defense Fund found that the impact was positive. Indeed, a 2022 paper in preparation studying voter behavior in New York City elections found that there are no demographic, racial, or ethnic differences in the rate at which voters say they like and understand RCV. Other scholarly research shows that RCV leads to more women and people of color running for office and more being elected. The upper right figure shows the percentage of candidates of color running for office in Bay Area cities before and after the adoption of ranked choice voting. The slate of candidates following RCV adoption is clearly more diverse. Women are better represented in districts with RCV elections. For example, 46% of elected mayors in RCV cities are women, compared with 23% in non-RCV cities, as shown in the pie charts in the lower left figure. Some evidence suggests that RCV can close the gap in voter participation between higher and lower income voters, and RCV elections do show a higher turnout among young voters. These two figures on the right are from a draft paper co-authored by University of Iowa's own Professor Carolyn Tolbert. They present the results of a detailed statistical analysis showing that non-white voters understood RCV as well or better than white voters, strongly addressing concerns about ballot accessibility. RCV incentivizes more positive campaigning because politicians are worried about winning people's second place votes and don't want to alienate them by attacking their first choice. It makes elections more about why voters should vote for a candidate rather than making the election exclusively about why they should vote against the other candidate. It allows for bridge candidates who may be able to speak to a broader constituency than our current system allows. It won't make negative partisanship go completely away, but it places a check on the worst behavior. A rigorous report by the New America Foundation found that among the biggest selling points of RCV is that it alters incentives and campaign dynamics in ways that appear to decrease negative campaigning and increase campaign civility. And here there's a general consensus that RCV probably does lower the temperature of candidate campaigns, at least at the local level. Surveys, interviews, and content analyses have shown that RCV elections tend to be, or perceived to be, more civil. And indeed, research by Donovan, Tolbert, and Gracie shows that voters in RCV cities were twice as likely to characterize recent campaigns as a lot less negative than in previous elections. Also, voters in non-RCV cities were twice as likely to report that candidates criticized each other some or most of the time, and voters in RCV cities had a much higher satisfaction with how campaigns were conducted. Note that Cedar Rapids and Des Moines were used in the control group for non-RCV cities.